This is Ask Todd on the Financial Exchange Radio Network. If you have an existing estate plan or are in the market for one, Todd Lutsky is here to answer your questions and help you plan for later life. Ask Todd is presented by Cushing Dolan, serving Massachusetts and New England for more than 35 years, helping families with estate and tax planning, Medicaid planning, and probate law. Visit CushingDolan.com. Now, here's Todd Lutsky.
And we are now joined by Mr. Todd Lutsky from the law firm of Cushing Dolan. We call the segment Ask Todd because this is your opportunity to ask Todd any estate planning question that you'd like. It could be about your estate plan, a family member's estate plan. But we open up the phone line so that you can ask Todd right here live on the show. Studio line is 888-205-2263. That is the number to call to ask Todd your question. Usually only have time to get through a couple of calls, so get calling now if you want to get in line. That number again is 888-205-2263. One more time, it's 888-205-2263. Mr. Lutsky, how are you today?
I am doing wonderful.
It's fantastic. Well, I had a bodybuilder friend.
Oh, yeah?
Passed away recently and left me all of his protein.
Oh, well, that's good.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
That's true.
So
that's very estate planning oriented of you.
I thought you'd appreciate that one.
I do. I like that one's my favorite one so far.
Todd, let's talk a little bit about estate planning as it relates to the cost of long-term care. Let's say that someone does absolutely no estate planning. Mm-hmm. What assets and income are at risk for that individual in the event of a long-term care situation?
Just want to make sure I understand the question. It's for an individual, not a married couple, because very different rules, and people need to know that.
Can we do both?
We could try to do both.
Let's start with an individual who's unmarried.
So an individual, unmarried. So we've got basically they'll start off by saying, what are your assets and what are they? Well, do you have a home? Home, we can address that. And then you have money. So break it down into two categories. Let's assume for now there's no rental property. This person just has a home and just has no vacation home and money. A home and money. Now, what are they going to do? They're going to take a look and say your home, if it's your home and you're single and it's located in Massachusetts and you've lived there and you've left the home to go to a nursing home, you didn't leave the home to go to assisted living and then to a nursing home. You left the home, went to the hospital, and then went to the nursing home. And you check a box that you intend to return to that home, even though you might never do it. It's arbitrary, subjective. And you then have to look at one more requirement. Is the value of the home less than, and this amount constantly changes once a year, so I'm going to try and give you a rough number of where we're at on that. It might have ticked up a little. Around $1,033,000, somewhere around there, but short of $1.1 million, somewhere in that range. If the net equity you have in the home is more than that number, and even though you've lived in the home, checked the box, you intend to return home, if the value's more than that, you're outright denied. Don't apply. I mean, it's a hard stop, okay? But likely it's less. So if it's less than that number, now you can at least say the home is non-countable for Medicaid eligibility. It's not going to prevent me from becoming eligible for Medicaid. However, it is lienable. They are going to put a lien on it, but you know what? You don't care because if you can get on Medicaid, it's only $6,500 a month, give or take, versus maybe $16,000 a month if you're private pay. So you always want to be on there. And just quickly, money. They're going to look at all your money, all your assets, bank accounts, IRAs, brokerage accounts, and assuming you own them, they're going to say, put them all on the table and reach in and take out $2,000 and stick those in your account. Everything else is over assets. How do you get eligible? You buy a Medicaid annuity if you can qualify. And that way you convert all these excess assets to an income stream through this annuity vehicle, and you could become eligible for Medicaid. The point here is that you might be able to become eligible for Medicaid even though you've done no planning.
Talking with Todd Lutsky from the law firm of Cushing and Dolan. Segment is called Ask Todd because it's your chance to ask him your questions. Phone number here is 888-205-2263. That is 888-205-2263. We're going to take a quick break here, but when we come back, it is right to your questions with Todd. Again, this is your chance to ask him your questions about your estate plan or a loved one's estate plan. That phone number is 888-205-2263. One more time, 888-205-2263. Quick break, your phone calls when we return.
Ask Todd with Todd Lutsky every Wednesday at 10:30, only here on the Financial Exchange Radio Network. You're listening to Ask Todd with Todd Lutsky on the Financial Exchange Radio Network.
All right, still got room on the phone lines at 888-205-2263 if you have an estate planning question for Mr. Lutsky. Again, that is 888-205-2263. Todd, during the last segment, we discussed, hey, what happens if you are single and haven't done any estate planning? What if you are a part of a married couple and you end up in a nursing home or a long-term care situation? What happens to assets and income then?
Well, it's great that you suggest that we talk about each one because the rules are really different. And as much as you may or may not like this, married couples, it's much easier to get eligible for Medicaid even though you've done no planning. So let's run through some of the assets that they have. Why don't we start by talking about the home so you can compare and contrast the difference from the way I described it for the single person.
Okay.
And then later we'll talk about the money side of things.
Sure.
So the home side is, with regard to the home, it still needs to be located in Massachusetts. You still need to be living there. And it needed to be your primary residence, healthy spouse. So if the healthy spouse is living there, it's located in Massachusetts, it's going to be non-countable. And in addition, it's going to be non-lienable. Wow, that's very different than... And there's no value limitation. Remember how that with the single person, it had to be worth less than a certain amount? Not the case here. Doesn't matter the value, could be multiple millions of dollars. And as long as you're living there and it's located in Massachusetts, it's non-countable, non-lienable. But we would have to talk about how to move it so that we do not leave it jointly owned, even though that's off the table for Medicaid eligibility purposes. So, folks, this is just a few of the ideas that we're giving you in terms of applying for Medicaid last minute. The guide is how to become eligible for Medicaid last minute, right? There are techniques that you can understand. The goal here is do not apply on your own. Get help because you're not going to know about all these unless the lawyer's helping you guide you through that process. And this guide is right for you whether you've done planning or haven't done any planning. It will allow you to, if you've done your planning, there's going to be assets that are outside the trust that need to be protected. So get the guide. If you've never done any planning, there's going to be a lot more assets that need to be protected. 866-848-5699 or legalexchangeshow.com and you'll get the guide. Again, 866-848-5699 or legalexchangeshow.com.
Todd, I got a question for you from Paul on the Cape. Paul is on the phone here right now. Paul, what's your question for Todd Lutsky?
Hello, Todd. Good morning. I have a question. My in-laws sold their home a couple years ago, and I'm wondering what the next step for them would be. They have some assets in the form of liquid funds, but I don't know what should be the next step as far as revocable, irrevocable trusts, and what they should do going forward.
So let me ask you just a couple of follow-up questions so I can help. So do they own any real estate at all at this point?
They recently purchased some land out in New York State. Mm-hmm. But that's it right now.
And what do you think that's worth?
Probably 50,000-ish or so.
Okay. So, but they're residents of Mass.
Yes.
Okay. And in terms, and so I guess they're renting somewhere. They're just living and paying rent somewhere.
They're living with me, yes.
Oh, okay. So now basically their only asset is this land in New York and X number of dollars. So do you know? I don't know. Do you know about what we're talking about in terms of the size of the assets? Is it under $1 million? Is it over $1 million?
It's definitely under $1 million. Maybe 100,000, couple 100,000, maybe.
All right. So it doesn't sound like there's a whole lot of assets to protect, and so that would be an issue. But in this case, I would think that if depending on and how old are they?
64. I think they just recently qualified for Medicare.
Okay, so at 64, and let's just say there's $250,000 of assets kicking around, and the house, I'm sorry, the land in New York. I would say that you'd want to set up if they're going to do planning at all. Now remember, they don't have an estate tax problem, so they wouldn't need an estate tax lawyer to worry about their estate taxes. That they're under federal exemption. They're under the state exemption, which is now $2 million. So there's no worries on that front. These are the things I go through, by the way. This is a checklist that everybody listening, when you meet a lawyer, you go through this to figure out what makes sense for that particular client. So their age, the size of their assets, and in this case, taxes. Of course, that's not an issue, but probate always is. And so in this case, you'd say, well, I want to avoid probate. Well, I also want to make sure I avoid probate in New York. Boy, I'd hate to have to go to probate in New York for a $50,000 piece of land. So that should be owned by a trust, and then that will avoid probate. And maybe some of their money can go into the trust. Now, what kind of trust? To avoid probate, revocable or irrevocable will get you there. So if that's all they care about, then maybe they just do the revocable, and they could be trustees and they could be in charge. If, on the other hand, they are concerned about trying to protect some of their assets of that, let's say, $250, and by the way, this you can expand the facts for someone who has a larger estate. I don't care if there's $1 million of assets sitting in this brokerage account or in their bank accounts, where what have you. We would want to take, if their goal is now I want to also add nursing home protection to this estate plan that we're trying to create for them, then the type of trust they need is irrevocable, not revocable. The big difference here in terms of what is the difference between a revocable and an irrevocable trust is protection from the nursing home, right? The revocable never will do it. The irrevocable will create a 5-year waiting period and will protect the assets from the cost of long-term care. So that would be my thought. Put some of the money in the irrevocable trust. Appoint a child as trustee. You're sounds like you're the in-law, so maybe your wife could be trustee if she's the daughter, and let the money sit there. They will be able to enjoy all the income generated from that money, just like they were enjoying the income before. They will be able to invest it any way they want. They will also pay the income tax on that money, even though it's generated inside this irrevocable trust, and they pay it at their own rate. So that's not going to be a problem for them. And in terms of access to the principal, it just can't be directly paid to them. Okay, so not a bad idea in terms of the type of trust they would do. I would think irrevocable would be the way to go. So I hope that helps a little. But, Chuck, I wanted to just expand a little bit more on our married couple situation. In this case, they're a married couple, but they're under that $1 million amount. Let's say you had this situation where this Paul person didn't do any planning, and which they haven't, and someone went in the nursing home. What would we do with all that money? What would we do with all the excess resources? So we talked about how the house would be non-countable for the married couple, but the money, right, they would put it all on the table, and they would allow the healthy spouse to keep $148,000, $2,000 for the sick spouse, and everything else, excess resources, would be purchasing an annuity, and we would be able to get the sick spouse eligible for Medicaid last minute.
Mr. Lutsky, thank you so much for joining us today.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
This has been Ask Todd on the Financial Exchange Radio Network. Ask Todd with Todd Lutsky has been presented by Cushing Dolan, serving Massachusetts and New England for more than 30 years, helping families with estate and tax planning, Medicaid planning, and probate law. Call 800-393-4001 or visit CushingDolan.com. The views expressed in this segment are solely those of Cushing & Dolan. Armstrong Advisory does not provide any legal or tax advice. Please consult with your legal or tax advisor on such matters. Cushing & Armstrong do not endorse each other and are not affiliated.